Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the severe increases in the cost of living that are continuing to blight us as 2022 gets ready to power up. And it's easy to see it in one sense as the consequences of Tory economic mismanagement, especially in pushing for their hard Brexit. In other words, a mistake due to incompetence, and this is certainly true to an extent. But when applied to a certain section of the population, it has been argued that it's all part of a very deliberate plan. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I'm going to invoke the old saying again. I've used this a few times on this channel. Do not ascribe to malice that which may be explained by incompetence. And the reason for this is that this wisdom will often serve you well, as there are far more idiots in the world screwing your life over accidentally than actually evil or at least amoral people doing so deliberately. Most of the time, when a government, for example, screws your life up, they didn't actually mean to. They just messed up, or they have a distorted view of the impact of their actions. I'll give you a bit of an example. Now, I saw an opinion piece many years ago from someone actually trying to stand up for young people on benefits, because they're a big target, aren't they? They were trying to counter the view of people, oh, they're just wanting kids to have an easy life on benefits. And this commentator was making the point that it doesn't make rational sense to do this, because once your capacity to have children's gone, they're grown up, you face a life of poverty. And they meant well, of course, but they were missing something from the equation, which is, well, so what's the motivation there? And you wouldn't see this from afar. Now, I taught in an FE college many years ago. And my personal experience, and that's all it is, this is just one small part of the puzzle, was of some young girls indeed trying to get pregnant in order to get their own place. And they were hard working. They worked well on their studies. They weren't lazy. And it wasn't out of a sense of wanting to have a life of leisure, as some may put it, but being trapped at home. They had abusive parents. They wanted out. They couldn't just get a job and save up for a deposit, because that's what you'd say, oh, get a job, save up for a deposit. That wasn't possible. Because, a couple of things really. First of all, actually, you can't just, I left home at 22. I couldn't get I had the money for the deposit. I had the money to pay the rent. I had evidence of income. I couldn't just get a flat. I had to rent a place with my parents agreeing to be guarantors for the first 6 months because I had no record of renting. The same would apply to these younger people. But the second is that their income would be taken by their parents as rent and upkeep. They'd be given like a tenner back to spend themselves. So all of their income would just be taken by their parents. No way out of this. No way out of that life via the normal route of work, because you don't get to keep your wages. You can't save. If they refused to hand over the money, well, they'd be out on the street. They'd be kicked out. The authorities would do nothing for a young, healthy person just because they're living on the street. But if they had a baby, that was different. And this is just one example of the desperate situation that people on the bottom rung of society in Britain find themselves in, that leads to what some will see as acts of desperation, but which the Conservatives make most of us see as wanting an easy life at the expense of others. You know, it's the classic thing, isn't it, about, saying that, your privations are caused by the most vulnerable in society, not the wealthy people who aren't paying their dues. The Conservatives cannot exist as a political force by stating their policies clearly and honestly and then implementing. That is because if it's laid bare, if they say exactly what they're going to do, even voters with little interest in politics would see how damaging they are. So the Conservatives lie about what they will bring. And even that doesn't work in itself. People would notice if they promised one thing and delivered the opposite. So they need to divide the population. They have to blame problems on someone else. This works especially well in the likes of the UK and the USA because we have a first past the post system where whole sections of the population are massively unrepresented in elections for one reason or another. In such circumstances, Conservatives have it easy. Demonise the poor, the vulnerable and the young. It's safe to do this because these groups do not vote in large numbers. So it doesn't matter that the few who do are likely to vote for their opponents. Particularly useful in the UK because those opponents are many-fold, so the vote gets split. In demonising these groups of people, you tell the people who do vote in large numbers, the middle classes and the elderly, that they are the reasons their lives are not what they'd hoped. They are a drain on resources. They're holding us back. They are the problem with this country. turn the country against itself with the larger voting blocs looking down on the already downtrodden. And this is where we come to the cost of living crisis. Because consider two groups of people facing a huge increase in the cost of food, energy and fuel. First, let's consider the typical middle-class voter who earns enough to pay the bills. They've got enough. They've got enough even for some luxuries like holidays, a new car every now and then. They can put something aside for a rainy day when the boiler explodes, whatever. These people will be shocked by the rising cost of living and it will squeeze their finances, and they do vote in large numbers. However, they will still be able to pay the bills. They will not have to choose between eating or heating. They will just have to reduce the amount they spend on luxuries and savings. But even that would be enough to punish the government at the ballot box, you would think. But this is where the Conservatives pull their trick. They convince these people that the reason their bills are so high or that their living standards are being squeezed is because of external factors. COVID, the war in Europe, the buggy. Doesn't matter. Labour, even though they haven't been in government for 12 years. As long as it's some bugger else's fault. But then there's another thing. Their taxes. If your taxes were lower, you'd be able to absorb the costs of inflation. Because the inflation's not our fault. That's external factors. That's these other things. You know, we can't do much about that. We can reduce your taxes, but unfortunately we have to spend them all on these layabouts. You know, but if we could reduce your taxes, you'd absorb the costs of these rising bills and still maintain your standard of living. So instead of blaming rising costs, they will say it's because taxes are so high. And they will say taxes are so high because of work-shy scroungers. In reality, the work-shy scroungers bleeding our country dry are the Conservatives. But they instead demonise the unemployed or the disabled. They behave as if work were plentiful and it's people being too lazy to go for these jobs that's the problem. Brexit even helped them out here. No end of examples of jobs going unfilled these days. What they don't mention is that the large groups of unemployed and the jobs vacancies are not in the same place, not by a long mile. So connecting them is not possible. They'll just paint a national picture of lots of vacancies, lots of unemployed. You join the dots. Okay, those dots are like 150 miles apart. You know, but that's what they'll say. If only the scroungers would do these jobs, then our economy would grow more. There would be lower demands on public funds because not as many would need benefits, and they would be earning enough to pay taxes themselves. The overall tax burden could then be reduced on individuals because more people would be paying them. Again, no talk of the very wealthy people and corporations that just don't pay taxes at all. No, it's because of the unemployed who won't do the jobs that are 100 miles away or the disabled who are just making a fuss. And once you've got people thinking in these terms, you then prepare them for the next stage. Once you've got people convinced that there are lots of people not working or not earning enough because they're lazy, you suggest a motivator. They'll soon want to work if they can't afford to live. And this is where the cruelest impact of the cost of living rises are put to work. They make it sound like it's a benefit. Because the people most hurt by these price rises are not the people who have to downgrade their holiday or wait another year for the car. It's the people who simply cannot afford all of what most of us would consider the basics. Heating has to be the first to go, then hot water, then massively reducing the amount of electricity used, not eating every day. What happens when they can't afford any of these things and still can't pay the rent? The Conservatives don't care because they will tell the general public that the suffering is not caused by a government that is enriching the already wealthy while strangling the economy, but because these people are not quite uncomfortable enough to give up and go to work yet. So we need to make it more uncomfortable. They call it making work pay. But instead of actually making sure that you get a living wage for working, now what they actually mean is increased brutality if you're not in work. Just make them go a little bit hungrier or a bit colder or have to do without something or other for a while. Then they'll decide that getting a job is worth it all of a sudden. And just like that, someone complaining of not being able to afford to eat or not being able to afford the bills is made out to be someone who just wants the world to owe them a living. And what we have in place right now is a particularly extreme form of it. Because Conservatives in general do tend to have this simplistic view of people. You know, if you work hard, you'll get the rewards in life. I see it parroted so many times by perfectly reasonable Conservatives in many ways. You know, they seem to genuinely believe that we live in a meritocracy because they see a small number of people from poor backgrounds making it big and think because some can do that, so can everyone. But even these people understand that you can't actually starve people into being economic powerhouses. There are Conservatives who recognise that a certain level of support is needed. But the Conservatives we have in power now see only the divisions they need to stoke in order to win power at the next election, because they are not governing. They are not governing in the interests of the country or its people, even within their political ideology. They know they're not doing this, so they know they have to create these culture wars, this divide and rule. And the less likely they are looking to win that next election, and all the talk at the moment is that the Tories are not going to win the next election. Of course, there's lots of ifs. And the more this happens, the more extreme their attacks on the marginalised will be. So yes, although the paths that led us to this place can be explained by serial incompetence and the government just frantically trying to dodge their way out of responsibility when it also fits one of their modus operandi, you don't half suspect that there is malicious intent behind it, because at the end of the day, there is benefits to them in the poor suffering. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.